Take a look.
Just 2 days after President William Ruto's sweep at the Kenya Medical Supplies Agency, the plot seems to thicken within the Ministry of Health.
If we see corruption as a disease, which indeed it is in our nation, we should work much more on prevention than waiting to fight it after it happens.
According to the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission's latest report on corruption and unethical conduct in the Kenyan healthcare sector projects, the Ministry of Health ranks as the second most corrupt ministry in the country. The survey was carried out in 25 counties. The intricacies lie within the procurement process, which has been marred by malpractice, favoritism, bribery, manipulation of cost and embezzlement of funds, approval of substandard work and materials, and political influence among the top interference in the tendering process. This was recently witnessed in the 3.7 billion shillings Global Fund mosquito net scandal involving KEMSA, which saw the Public Health PS Josephine Buru and the KEMSA board sent packing.
We want to ensure that KEMSA does its job, and just doesn't do it but does it well, that they have to be stocked on the most essential drugs and health commodities needed to serve Kenyans.
Meru, Tharaka Nithi, Embu, Nakuru and Marsabit are the top 5 counties which had healthcare projects that had been completed above the planned budget. In a bid to clean up the rot at Afya House, Nakhumicha says the ministry is changing gear towards local manufacturing of drugs, which will ensure sufficient stock-up at KEMSA while ensuring an open tender process. Helen Aura, NTV.
Thanks, Helen. And elsewhere, members of county assemblies have announced the suspension of plenary sittings across the 47 counties over failure by the national government to heed to their demands, including reinstatement of their sitting allowances that had been scrapped by the Salaries and Remuneration Commission. NTV's political affairs reporter Vincent Oduor tells us more.
Wednesday marked the end of the 14-day ultimatum issued by members of county assemblies to the national government, marking the beginning of no business being transacted on the floor of the county assemblies in the 47 counties.
We therefore instruct all members of county assemblies to proceed and suspend all the plenary sitting indefinitely with immediate effect.
Among the issues the MCAs had wanted addressed include the review of their remuneration, legal establishment of the Ward Development Fund, and reinstatement of plenary allowances, saying their low remuneration is curtailing their mandate to oversight county governments.
Take a situation where I am going to oversight a clerk who is earning 450,000 and your basic salary is 86. How are you going to oversight a director, a deputy director, who is earning more than you? You see, you are sabotaging devolution.
When you look at how the county assemblies operate, we operate at the mercy of the executive. Any funding that is required by the county assemblies have to be approved through the executive, through the CEC finance, that has been approved by the county assemblies.
Sisi ndio tunatumika kupitisha bajeti, sisi ndio tunavet watu, alafu tunafanywa kama ya kwamba si watu.
Vincent Oduor, NTV.
All right, thanks, Vincent. And of course, let's take a look at the Shakahola update. This is as far as the number of bodies that have been exhumed so far, and 15 bodies have been exhumed in Shakahola Forest, raising the death toll to 227. One of the bodies was exhumed from the thickets and is believed to be among the latest victims of the fasting cult. 85 people have been rescued from the forest so far after one male adult was found on Wednesday. No arrests were made, but those in custody still stand at 31. As at now, 611 persons have also been reported missing as the search and rescue operations continue. Of course, that is one of the stories that we're keeping tabs, and of course we'll be reporting any developments that we have so far. But as at 17th of May, again, 50 new bodies were exhumed. Well, elsewhere, Africa is demanding 2 permanent seats at the United Nations Security Council as it calls for reforms of the body to have it change from an exclusive club of 5 permanent members to a more representative, that is the Global Council that works for the interests of the whole world. Africa's tough position was presented by President William Ruto, who is the chair of the Committee of African Heads of State and Governments on Climate, when he addressed the 3rd Pan-African Parliamentarians Summit on Climate Policy and Equity in Midrand, Johannesburg. Ruto urged the Pan-African Parliament to lead the charge that is in having Africa solutions to African problems, like intervening in the crisis in Sudan and other regions in the continent facing conflict.
When others want to engage with us, they don't want to deal with a troika. They want to invite 50 heads of state. So we go to a meeting, just explain to me what kind of outcome you expect where 50 heads of state are sitting. Everybody is asked for speak to 1.5 minutes. You speak to for 1.5 minutes. What kind of engagement are you going to get? You're going to get nothing, right? The best that you get is photographs. They normally line us up somewhere, you know, crowd of 50 heads of state, you know, and that's all we come home with, you know, because there isn't time to engage. Any serious country that wants to engage with Africa, yeah, must respect first our architecture.
All right, and of course, we all know climate change affects everybody. And of course, the president, just recently also talked about how important it is for people not to really focus on who has done what in terms of contributing to climate change, but rather focus on some of the solutions that we can all provide. And that includes you and I to fight together to make sure that we protect our planet. And of course, we protect, the environment as well. So we can all contribute in one way or the other. And remember, Kenya is actually expected to host the Africa Climate Change Summit, and that is in September. So we hope to see what the president will have to say, and of course other African leaders as well. There's a whole lot of conversation about loss and damage as far as climate change is concerned, so we're waiting to see how that will pan out. But let's come back to the country, and the price of sugar is shooting through the roof barely 2 months after the window for duty-free importation of sugar lapsed. Well, begging the question, just what impact imported stocks had on the market. A spot check by NTV reveals that sugar is retailing at as much as 200 shillings per kilogram, up from the average 158 shillings reported at the start of the year. On December 22nd last year, Treasury Cabinet Secretary Professor Njuguna Ndung'u gazetted the duty-free importation of 100,000 metric tons of sugar for the period ending March 2023. This window was meant to help stabilize supply and helping lower prices.
Imported 9,300. The price of the company is right now 9,800, and it is difficult to local people to buy 200 per kilo.
Okay, in the start of the prices, when the prices started going up, we experienced some complaints from customers.
All right, and of course, like we said, there's a lot happening in the countries. Jim India pointed out, earlier. Oh, there's so much that is going on. So how about we take a look at what the dailies, say? And of course, we begin with the Daily Nation very quickly. And of course, the headline reads, "Inside Ruto's many battles." All right, and of course, the president has to deal with a lot of things. One of them is taxation. All right, and of course, there's also the whole whole aspect of inflation, and we're talking about the high cost of living where almost all of us are actually feeling the pitch of the same. There's also the whole question about corruption scandal, which again we will focus on the conversation today, and this is as far as the different ministries that have been affected, and of course the whole question about the independence of the institutions that again have been set up to make sure that, they deal with matters corruption. So we'll be focusing on the same in today's conversation. There's also the whole question about state jobs. We have the debt crisis. We have strike threats by workers. And of course, recently we also saw that from the health workers. There's also the question of county cash delays and salary delays as well. And of course, one of the things that has caused a bit of headache, and especially to the Kenya Kwanza government, is the opposition protests as well. So of course, we'll be focusing on the same. And of course, the headline reads, like I said, inside Ruto's many battles, and he is a man on a mission. All right. So 8 months after taking office, President William Ruto has encountered a myriad of hurdles, many of which have forced him to shift positions on campaign promises he made, hurting his supporters and serving as fodder for his rivals. Will he surmount them and complete his mission? That is the big question. And of course, if you want to get to understand more on the same, that story is on pages 4 and page 5 as well. And this is on the Daily Nation, and of course still on the front page of Daily Nation. So MCAs have suspended sittings, and this is to demand pay rise. And of course we looked at that story where of course members of the county assemblies, they have announced the suspension of plenary sittings across the 47 counties, and this is over the failure by the government to meet their demands, and that includes a salary increment and the reinstatement of sitting allowance. And of course that story is on page 7. And of course, I'm really curious to hear what Jim India you have to say as far as that is concerned. And of course, we also have Kidi Mwaga, who has joined us, a policy and governance analyst. Of course, we'll be looking forward to hear what both of you have to say as far as these two stories are concerned. All right, on the first page of the Daily Nation, that is inside the president's very many battles that he has to go through just to make sure that the country is sort of somehow stable. Okay, so still on the front page, and this is as far as the Daily Nation is concerned. So of course the bitter taste, like we just highlighted that story, why sugar prices will remain high, and this is a local and global shortage of sugar cane, and speculation following a proposal in the finance bill to introduce a new tax on sugar, which has triggered an increase in sugar prices. So of course those of us who are hoping that the prices might go down, maybe not so soon. And of course that story continues on page 10 of the Daily Nation. And on matters education, still on the front page of the Daily Nation, let me just pull this out so that you can see that clearly. All right, oopsie, it has disappeared. Okay, just give me a sec. Let me get this one on the front page, but just allow me to read what it says right here on the hard copy that I have. Okay, and it says the portal open for 2022 KCSE candidates to select university and college courses as well. And of course this says the education CS Ezekiel Machogu launched the placement exercise at the University of Nairobi yesterday. And of course that story is on the back page of the Daily Nation. But Jim India, very quickly on the president's very many battles, and of course that has been clearly highlighted. There's the opposition protests, we have the county cash delays and salary delays, taxation, inflation, and all those things. I mean, it's like it's bit of a stress for the president. He said together with his deputy that the country was broke when they got into power. So it's like they have a lot of things to make sure that are aligned, just to make sure that the country is in a good place. What do you have to say? It's a lot of things for one person to sort of deal with.
This is the normal day in the life of a president. You go to any country. Yeah. I think in fact his entry might be easier. If you ask the president of Sudan, he might have a different story to tell. Okay. But not negating the importance. So when I looked at the different aspects that you have highlighted, I realized that almost every single one of the of the battles that he's fighting, he sort of has a solution. Because if you think about the opposition protest, yesterday we heard that the bipartisan committee has selected a smaller committee to deal with the IEBC issue, which you all know is the main issue that that bipartisan committee is going to be discussing. And they've written to Parliament indicating that that is, and so you can imagine that the opposition protest will be dealt with for quite a while. As long as the IBC talks are on the table, the opposition are happy. You look at the whole issue of taxation. There's the finance bill that is going before the House, and we're expecting the budget to be read in the next few weeks in Parliament. He has proposed a raft of measures which many Kenyans perhaps feel is painful, that we have more and more taxes increasing, but we have the levels of income remaining the same. And even for some people, you have a lot more people coming out of jobs. I'm curious to see the numbers that Kebs would tell us in terms of how many have been out of jobs for the last 6 months since this government got into power, or how many jobs have we created. The economy has shrunk big time because of the high cost of living. So many companies have had to close, many startups have had to close, many SMEs have had to close, and will have to close should the finance bill pass as is, right? Because now the finance bill is looping in a lot more smaller businesses. If you're earning anything from 500K, you're being looped in, while previously it was from $1 million. So again, I think he's prepared us when he says things are going to get tougher before they get easier. So brace yourselves. And I think those are some of the, we say choices have consequences. And so part of the consequences of our decisions in 2022, when we elected our members of parliament, when we elected our senators, and when we elected this president, part of the consequences we are now living with.
Absolutely.
And as Kenyans, we have to, most of the time we are quick to point hands and say the president has and he has not. But forget that we are major stakeholders. If it is a mess, we are the chief architects of this mess. If it is working, we are the prime architects of an institution that is working. So I think at the end of the day, he's been pushed to a corner where he has to deal with, there's the high cost of living. If you think about, for instance, the debt crisis, Parliament was considering the Public Finance Management Act amendments to it, and one of the amendments that had been pushed to Parliament was to increase the debt ceiling. One of the amendments was to circumvent the requirement that Parliament must approve before Treasury can borrow more, and now they're saying that the Treasury can actually increase the debt ceiling and borrow more, and only come and explain to Parliament after the fact. So you're seeing a president who on the one hand is saying the economy is hard, we don't need to borrow more. But every policy decision that he's made, in my opinion, a lot of the policy, especially the financial policy decisions that have been made, do not resonate with what we are hearing him say. A lot of them seem to be going back to the same. He's found that this system only works on debt. And so how can we accumulate more debt? He's found that this system only works on taxes. And so he's found out, how do I tax my way to wealth?
I mean, listen, and you see, one of the things that a lot of Kenyans are saying is, this is what you promised us during the campaigns. We will fight this. We will fight corruption. The whole question about, debt, we will completely maliza it, okay? And he says within a very short time frame. So, and what you're saying is Kenyans need to sort of be a little bit patient, with the president and see him work. Provide some of the solutions, to the challenges that we are experiencing today. But it's a whole question of what we promised versus what we're getting right now.
Famous politicians have told us that you campaign in poetry, but govern in prose. I think a lot of times, the president, being a good Bible reader, he knows that sometimes you tell people what their itching ears want to hear. And so during the campaign period, our itching ears wanted to hear all these things. I will end, I will fight the deep state. I will end the cartels. And then you come here and realize that the cartels, I don't like using the word cartel, but we've realized that, for instance, there was a sugar consignment that was to be destroyed that somehow found its way into the market. And you realize that this case is big. You realize that KEMSA, which was a campaign issue, and which you said the other side were beneficiaries of the last KEMSA, and then in your first 7 months in office, KEMSA hit. And you realize that you can change the head of state, you can change members of parliament, but institutions of government often remain the same. Those who manage those institutions, we don't elect them, right? These guys are appointed. A lot of them are permanent and pensionable, and the worst that you can do to them is reshuffle them. You just can't fire some of them, especially those who were hired through the Public Service Commission. There's nothing much you can do to them. And so, and those are the guys who run government. And so I think the president finds himself where he's his worst enemy in terms of he speaks too much. He loves the media too much. He overexposes himself. And so because he overpromises, unfortunately he underdelivers in where he overpromises. And Kenyans are keeping track of every single promise. And unfortunately, every single day he makes new promises. And just shifts timelines. So if he says nikiweka Biblia chini hivi, the cost of fuel will go lower, he says, well, actually, you know, the dollar has done this. Suddenly the war in Ukraine is an issue. So I think at the end of the day, Kenyans will say he promised one. But as I've said, we must also take responsibility as a people. If you voted for this president, you are, in fact, we need you to hold him more accountable than those of us who did not vote for him.
Okay, I hear you. All right, the panel is complete. Kidi Mwaga, like we said, policy and governance analyst, you know, walked into the studio. Good to see you this morning. Karibu sana. Hezbon Owila, good to see you as well this morning. Media and political, you know, communications analyst, and of course, not forgetting Arnold Maliba, who's a policy and governance analyst. Karibuni sana. Good to see you, gentlemen. In the, I was about to say, but it's okay. It's okay. Gender, you know, all those things. But it's good to see all of you this morning. Karibuni sana. What do you guys make of, you know, the president? Because again, the headline reads, he's under siege. Okay, and of course the president took up the reins in the country in difficult times. He has a lot of things to put in place to make sure that the country is stable. Kidi, what do you make of this? A lot of things, and of course, like we said, very, very well highlighted on the front page of the Daily Nation.
One thing I do not doubt for a moment is that we have in State House a man who is intelligent enough to know what needs to be done and how it should be done, and also brave enough to do it. The president so far has had to, you know, they say that there is no decision that gets to the president's table if it could be solved down the food chain. So the president has had to deal with big decisions. We have seen what he has attempted to do with education. For a moment, the president is telling us that it is not enough to say that a student is bright but needy. That there are so many students down there who could be bright. But because of lack of opportunity, because of circumstances they are born in, they may not make it to the newspapers as one of the best performing students. But he has demonstrated to us, at least in action, that we must find means of how to extend opportunities to such children. I have seen, in small measure, the decisiveness that he has brought to the war on corruption. The war on corruption has, for some time, been used as a decoy, especially to when a president is seeking to enhance their legitimacy or mid-poll ratings. You realize that there is usually a frenzy of activities that usually look like a war on corruption. But a few months down the line, you realize that there are quiet acquittals. You know, so at least in this instance, the first thing we saw is that the president acted decisively. That he did not suspend, but he sent home the person who has got the authority to incur expenditure. Going forward, he has been in office less than a year. I think that part of his problems are also because of the economy that he inherited. I will not use that as an excuse. Because other presidents have walked into office during worse times. A case in point is FDR. And when FDR walked into Oval Office, and then in a couple of, before everyone realized it, he had the New Deal for the Americans. I think President William Ruto, given a conducive working environment, and especially now that the Azimio team have decided that we will not resolve our conflicts, our political differences on the streets. I think that in a short while we are going to have a president who is going to deliver to the people of Kenya.
Okay.
Thank you.
Believing him. All right. Okay. What do you have to say?
I think the president appreciates the burden and the weight of the work that he has.
Okay.
Unfortunately, this is not the country he and Uhuru Kenyatta found in 2013. By then, we had about a national debt of about 1.7 trillion. Today, he actually comes into office with a country that is just in the last about 10 years or 9 years or so, we accumulated about 6 trillion shillings in debt. The circumstances are not the same, but we can actually see resolve because initially the previous regime, for example, in corruption, used the fight against corruption as a talking point, but you realize that William Ruto has actually made that an action point.
Okay.
And that
so the talks to
whereas previously we saw the leader of the country getting angry during national events and railing down on his own servants, and he sounded so helpless. Here, when you ask him, he tells you, I'll do something about it, and then 48 hours later, you actually see action.
Okay.
At that particular level, a lot of people didn't expect that William Ruto will have the political goodwill around dealing with corruption and actually taking decisive action. But then if you're William Ruto, you do not have an option, because first of all, you cannot be fighting with the opposition. You have got a fight against the cost of living, and then have a fight with your own staff who do not want to work seriously. So you have a choice, like for example, are you going to defend your regime, defend your legitimacy, deliver for the people, and also again, fight with your own people? I think from what we've seen in the last two instances, I think the president says ukipewa kazi fanya, na ukifanya ufanye vizuri, kama utaki na unataka mchezo uende nyumbani ucheze na watoto wako.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Hezbollah, I'm curious to hear what you have to say. Is it more of, drastic, measures that the president is taking, or really just to show, what, I can actually crack a whip, and get these people to work?
Well, I think there's a lot of resoluteness in what the president is doing. I mean, you can actually see that there is action, the way Arnold is putting it.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that there wasn't action in the previous regime. It's only that I think we currently have a president who is in the thick of things. He wants to probably do almost everything.
Yeah.
Faced with a number of challenges. And you can actually see, to some extent, there's a sense in which you can see around the taxation, the debt crisis, the cash crunch.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which they have a way out of this.
Okay.
The only problem is it has nothing to do with the plan that they had. Whatever they promised Kenyans is nowhere close to what they're doing.
It's like what we expected to see, and then once you get into government, it's like a completely different...
Yes, we knew that the cost of living was going to be a challenge, but they had a solution when they were campaigning.
Yeah.
But I think the solution that they're giving Kenyans now does not look like a solution that will solve the cost of living issues immediately.
Immediately, yes.
If you look at it from a grander perspective, I mean, it's clear that you have to live within your means, the way he says. We have to find a lasting solution to the debt crisis. And that means that we have to generate money from within. And that basically means that we have to tax people slightly more or be a lot more strategic in our taxation. And it's what they've done with the finance bill. And my feeling is, I mean, in the immediate future, I mean, it's going to be a big issue for Kenyans who expected life to be a lot more easy with the reign of President William Ruto.
Okay.
But they've not even communicated how sustainable, this is going to be in the long term. Because when you say that we need to generate money that can pay our loans, which is okay. I mean, we don't want to be in debt, perpetually. Then it has to be clear that for how long are we going to do this, and how is it going to reduce, the high cost of living. And I think to a large extent, you'd say that, being closer to the media, speaking to people is probably going to be one of the main undoing, because he'll promise a lot, but then delivering will be a totally different ball game.
A bit of a slow
And you see, the electorate is very unforgiving, not just in Kenya, but globally.
Everywhere, yeah.
When George Bush Sr. was getting into office, I think he had the same challenges of taxation. He brokered a deal, that worked for the American, citizenry, but it didn't work for him. So he lost the election to Bill Clinton out of that. Whether that will happen to William Ruto is something that we will get to see. But I must say that we have to be very clear that there's nothing new in what he has done at KEMSA. In fact, if you ask me, it is action that is
sporadic, action that is meant to excite the masses. In the previous regime, I mean, the president was very clear that if you are part of the executive and you are arraigned in court, you'll have to step aside.
Yes.
So what is the procedure here? And whatever has happened to the CS and the KEMSA board and the CEO, is it a precedent that will be followed by other state officers? And if it is a precedent, then what happened? Because we actually don't know to what extent these people were told either you're gonna leave you leave office or suspended. What are the mitigating factors that were involved here? Remember this president campaign say that I'm going to empower institutions. So which institution acted here? Is it the institution of the presidency? And is it the way he's going to fight corruption? There's a sense in which corruption is a two-edged sword. The way you fight corruption can actually glorify corruption, or the way you fight corruption can actually mitigate any future cases of corruption.
Okay.
And when you have individuals who are hounded of office without clarity, of the circumstances that led to them being kicked out of office, then the due process of the law finds them not guilty, and they were paraded in the media. And then they come back to the office, they'll come back as heroes. That is what you'll be doing.
Yes, and for a very long time we have seen that, there is, someone is involved in a, corruption case. Really, no charges, against them years later, and we also see them in office. And one of the things is some of the top leadership, and especially in the Kenya Kwanza government, which I think brought a lot of issues, especially, earlier on in the year, where these are the same corrupt people that you're also taking to the office. What about, the same? But at the same time, we've seen the president having to do like a lot of explaining, all right, in terms of some of these changes that, have been effected. That leaves the question, so is it more of, you're taking action because you want people to see you take action, or really there is a bit of an impact when it comes to these actions that you are taking? Is it that the president has then to tell the people, so I am doing this because of this and all that? Because that is what we see him do a lot lately in the media.
So those of us who, have often called for open and transparent governance, I think we had no doubt that this president was going to be a hands-on president. We had no doubt that he would say he'd show up for a press conference at 7, and he'll be there at 6:45, for instance, and journalists will have to catch up with him. And what we have seen is, so if you think about Kibaki, for instance, he didn't like the media, and so that's why he had Alfred Mutua do all the media work for him. And then you had Uhuru Kenyatta, whom we did not know if he liked the media or he did not, right? Because one day he calls for a press conference, and he says, so he called for press conferences when he had like this big announcements to make, those critical moments. And then you have Ruto, his communication style is very different. And communication is part of the art of leadership. As a good leader, you have to figure out, how do I best communicate to my people? How do I best continue convincing them that I am in office, I know what I am doing, and they understand that this is their government and that they have a legitimate stake in it. He campaigned and said, serikali ya mahasla. And so you have the thing about mahasla is that you have to constantly speak to us.
But do you think Kiuliza Bahasla, if this is their government, they'll say something totally different? I mean, the deputy keeps saying, what is it called? Shareholders, stakeholders?
But we are hustlers. We are shareholders. Clearly, he's saying those who voted. So any hustler, anyone who's a hustler, and this is a hustler government, so we are shareholders as hustlers. And the fact that he's constantly had to speak to us, like people, not speak down on us. The fact that we are seeing him as very much in touch with the people, and that was his driving force, that he had been so in touch with the grassroots. He had been so in touch with the people on the ground. He was constantly in every corner. And you remember the president saying, ukipiga kona hapo unapata William, ukipiga kona pale unapata William. And that's how he moves. And I think he has brought that into his presidency. Those around him have probably advised him that it is important as a president to you better over-communicate. You don't want to leave people to guess. Because when you leave any guesses, you have an opposition that has microphones on their bedsides, ready to speak. When they just wake up, they have a press conference on any issue. In fact, even the issue that they spoke about the day yesterday, they will speak about it again, just using different scripts. So if you leave any loopholes, then the opposition controls the narratives on, for instance, taxation. So he has to constantly come and say, the housing levy is not a tax.
Listen, he was asked that question recently, and the more he explained, according to some people, the more confused people were. So,
well, he said it's not a tax because it will come back to you. It is a tax if it is coming and we are going to spend it. But this is money that you either get a house, or you take it to your pension, or we pay it back to you. Okay. So how is that a tax? So he has had to do that because he has realized that the opposition takes whatever government is doing, manipulates it, makes it, interprets it in its own way, and puts it out there in the public. He does not have any trusted person in his government who can do that job for him, who can do that explaining for him. David D tries, and then he comes and tells us we write our own bills and our own budgets. So that's not the guy he wants to keep talking to the public.
But he is part of his. He's part of one of his, close, I would say, advisors of.
He has a few non-hustlers around him.
Okay, can you very quickly?
Thank you. I think it is important that we have a constantly present president now than a president who was operating from behind the shadows.
Okay.
Because in moments such as this, if the president were to be away for a week, out of the limelight for a week, or say 2, it will create sufficient fertile grounds for people to begin, saying things that are neither here nor there, especially considering the environment we are dealing in. But realize that the biggest problem that the president has got is dealing with is a question of taxes.
Okay. Yes.
That taxes is because of the prevailing fiscal environment that he has to operate within. Because when this administration was coming in, my co-panelists will agree that right now there are a lot of loans that are falling due. Because those loans are falling due, if you look at the budget, the biggest budget line is recurrent. In that recurrent budget, expenditure, the biggest budget line is tax is loan debts. So that a lot of money is collected from the economy, then this money goes into repaying debts, so that the economy is left without anything within it.
Okay.
So then this, of course, heightens the anxiety of the hustlers, as my brother Jim puts it. So then the hustlers are asking themselves, that was this our government?
Was this our government in the first place? Okay.
President William Ruto would have wanted to, possibly wanted to deliver a hustlers government. And of course, that hustlers government is not in the appointments. If anything, appointments should be people who have got requisite professional and academic credentials to be able to get the job done.
All right.
But then a government cannot be for the a few educated, so that when the president promised to deliver a hustler government, in my understanding and the understanding of many people of Kenya, was that it was a government that was going to address itself the question of the cost of living, the question of upward social mobility, the question of dignity as a development outcome. But then these things you cannot do when there is no money. So that, and I think I have looked at the finance bill, and I think that part of what the president is inadvertently trying to do is to ignite debate, especially in parliament, and even within the populace, within the context of public participation, so that we come forward with bold suggestions. Whether is it time that we could possibly consider debt default, or debt restructuring, or what do we do out of this, or do we tax ourselves out of this debt situation? Of course, taxing ourselves out of this situation is one of the options that the president has. But then, how tenable is it? By the time the president was coming in office, a lot of people are feeling hit in regards to the cost of living. And there are those who voted for the president because of how eloquently he was addressing himself the question of the cost of living.
But now the situation is different.
Yes, but then even after elections, you realize that it ordinarily, even in good times, it takes time for the economy to recover.
Absolutely. I mean,
Yes, so now, about a week ago, in about a span of 2 weeks, Moody's agency indicated that we are in a position where we are likely to default on our debts.
On our debts, yes.
And you see that rating by Moody's is what we'd call an economic red flag. A red flag in an economy, whether an economy is doing bad or otherwise.
Okay. So I hear you. I hear you, but yeah.
So I think that now that we have the finance bill, in my understanding, I think that the president is using the finance bill to ignite big debate, big conversations on what we do as a country.
All right.
If the president were to go to say to our lenders and tell them that we are not going to pay, while it seems like we are living large, I mean, our lenders would say, our creditors would say that, but it seems that you are only not willing to.
Yeah,
but then if it comes from the people, if the people tells the president that please let us default, let us restructure, let us give ourselves say a 2-year, 3-year, 4 years headroom, so that money we are spending on debts, in repaying debts, is spent in the economy, is used to reinvigorate the economy, is used to ensure that Mama Mboga is able to live in dignity. I think that way we will be out of this mess.
Okay.
I think for me, in my view, especially in regards to the finance bill.
All right, we need to take a break, but okay.
So let me just say this in regards to the finance bill.
Yes.
I think the president is using it to ignite big debate from the people.
Thank you. All right, but of course, there's a whole aspect about the balancing act, so that yes, in as much as you're taking all these measures just to make sure that the economy is sort of like stabilized, or the country is stabilized, then how about not one side suffers the most, while we take this draft measures just to make sure that he works and brings the country back to where it was a few years ago, if not better. But let's take a break. Of course, that conversation continues. And of course, like I said, today we're focusing more on graft and what the president really has to do. We've seen him do a lot of changes as far as that is concerned. But then again, of course, the big question is then how tenable is that? So of course, that conversation comes up after the break. Stay with us. This is AM Live.
God is always engaged in our affairs. He's engaged in your life. He's engaged in the life of our community. He's engaged in the life of our church. He's engaged in the life of our nation.
In your paper this week, Congo War, enter SADC, exit EAC, there's fear. Too many troops from different countries intervening in the country could lead to confusion on the ground. Talks for EAC, political federation, shift into high gear. Too many cooks could spoil the broth in the Sudan crisis. Samia pulls a fast one on constitution review. Plus our opinion leaders. If I cared for Luca, I would be exclusively banking on women. LC Eyakuze, rejoice, for the Ugandan ghost will soon have nowhere to hide. Joachim Buembo. For these and more stories, get your copy of the East African.
Get ready to tantalize your taste buds and embark on a culinary journey with Pishi Bomba, the ultimate cooking show that brings the flavors of the world right into your living room. Tune in this Sunday at 6:30 p.m. with me, Claire Karatu, for a mouth-watering adventure.
Pishi Bomba, in association with Coca-Cola.
Make your mealtime more magical. Buy any participating pack. Check under the cap to get your code and stand a chance to win free food shopping for a year, plus millions in instant cash, airtime and shopping vouchers.
Mimi nilikuwa tu pale reserve
nime-maintain, kuna fresh air, nini, na prosper tu in peace. Alafu, imagine shemeji yangu, akakuja ametoka Nairobi, ati yeye ameomoka. Akaniambia, ati Nairobi iko vitu soft, vitu mzuri. For example, tukifika Nairobi, atanipeleka place inaitwa Village Market, tukakulia huko. Si tukapanga safari, sisi ndio tumewasili wapi? Nairobi. Guess what? Huyu mtu badala ya kunipeleka Village Market, akanirutisha village, akanipeleka market.
To get Market Village, dial *812*799#. Skiza, Na Nation.
Mrs. Diana, Mr. Diego is about to move out of the house.
What?
He's almost out the door with his luggage. He just told his grandfather.
Mother, I'm begging you to do what I'm asking you to, please. This is the only way. I'm begging you, Mother. Come on, please. I'm begging you. If Diego leaves, everything will be lost.
After all the profound arguments that we've made, I just can't continue living under the same roof as you.
Now what kind of nonsense is this? We could always speak and agree on something.
No, Grandpa! Everything has been said. If I stay, the only thing I'm doing is to continue putting up with your whims and that of Diana's. I'm sorry, but I cannot continue living like this.
Head over heels.
NTV, turning on your world.
All right, welcome back. The show is AM Live. Hey, okay, of course the conversation still continues even during the break, all right? And of course it's all about the state of the nation. And of course today we're focusing majorly on corruption. And this is as far as, you know, the president and of course the raft of measures that he has taken, you know, just to make sure that, you know, all the state agencies and the ministries, you know, are actually working in harmony for the better of the country, all right? And of course in studio we have Kidi Moga, who's a policy and governance analyst. We also have Jim India, who is a political analyst. We have Hezbollah Owila, who's a media and political communications analyst, and not forgetting Arnold Maliba, who's a policy and governance analyst as well, in studio helping us with the conversation. Owila, do you want me to give you a chance to talk about before we really now get into, into the root of the matter today? This is as far as some of the measures that the government has, I mean the president really has taken to make sure that, you know,
you know, one thing you have to give this administration credit for is the fact that they are very decisive.
Okay.
And, you know, listening to the president on Sunday, it was very clear that the president is heavily invested in the finance bill, you know, so they've got everything figured out. They've sort of made a decision, you know, on how they're going to deal with the debt crisis, the cash crunch in this country. And it is clear that they're going to deal with it through a taxation, you know, approach to everything, you know. So the ramifications of that are very clear, you know, that it's not like things are going to be any different if it was another president. It's only that things are going to be difficult for a president who had promised people a fairly, you know, affordable kind of lifestyle for the guys at the bottom of the pyramid. But if you look at the finance bill, because it's basically a question of giving KRA the mandate to collect money. And that's why people are talking about this housing contribution, the 3% by the employees and the employers. It looks like a tax. It is not a tax, but it has all the indications of a tax. That whether you like it or not, once it is passed, you will have to pay it.
Okay.
You see, so for me, a decision has already been made.
Okay.
What we need to be asking ourselves, if it doesn't work, will the consequences be gross enough to send this regime home come 2027? Okay. And this is a choice that they've made. Even when they were campaigning for the 2022 elections, they were very clear. I think President Ruto made a choice that he's going to be outside there, tanga-tangaing. And enough people say that they are tanga-tangaing. But that was his direction to the presidency. Okay. It worked. I think some of us were on this panel saying that it may not work, it will work, but it is a decision that he made. So that resoluteness is something that we have to give them credit for. Okay. But at the same time, we have to sit back and ask ourselves, this is what this government promised, and this is what this government is delivering. You know, so the decision is ultimately for Kenyans to decide, because when you give a president the power, you're not giving him forever. In a democracy, you give elected leaders power for a limited period of time, after which you have oversight to say we are giving you more power or we are withdrawing it.
Okay, all right, like you said, so we have to wait until, you know, the next 2027 to see whether he...
No, at least you have to wait until we see the implications of this bill once it passes.
Once it passes. All right, I see that. I mean, Arnold, let me give you a chance so that we finish on this and then, you know, then talk about the KEMSA and, of course, the results shuffle as well. Yeah.
You know, Jim spoke about politicians campaigning in poetry and, of course, governing in prose. The problem has always been that poetry is sweet, short, and gets to the heart very easily. Flipped is that politicians will easily, and it's actually more advisable to campaign on ideology. Because ideology is like poetry. It's easier, it gets to the heart. You're speaking to the hearts of the people so that it's quite emotive. But once you get into office, you govern by public policy. And public policy is about what works. It's about pragmatism. And you realize that ideology might not really make sense when you're actually coming up with a public policy. So that is normally the problem. You see, everybody else will tell you initially that this particular government wouldn't be acting on corruption. But when they act, they say, why are they acting? How are they doing it? So, for a lot of times when you're doing policy, you realize that you are damned if you do and you are damned if you don't. So you pick the best of the damnations that suits that particular situation and you run with it. That's why you see, guys are already asking, what is the process? Why would he be doing that? Initially, people said that we know that, you know, the media has already reported that there have been cases. By the time it gets to the media, there is sufficient data or evidence upon which you can actually take even administrative action, and it's allowable in law. But then guys will be like, why are you doing that? Where are you going that? For a lot of things, again, I'll go back to what Jim said earlier on. He said that the president loves the media. The president doesn't love the media. In 8 months, in the last 8 months, he's actually been, there have been only 2 presidential addresses. And we know that we're actually at a very hard time when a resurgent opposition has actually been laying fire on the doors of government. So he's only done twice. And one thing we've actually said that on this particular platform, I think with the Wheeler before, is that government was actually under-communicating initially. Because you realize a lot of the scores that the opposition really made initially, leading to the first demonstration and even the first lull, was because government was completely under-communicating. As it was completely under-communicating. And then it forced the president himself to come in because the buck stops with him. And that's why I was actually saying, how will William Ruto defend the Kenya Kwanza regime, defend his government, defend his budget, and then go back to defend a CS and a PS and the chairman of a parastatal down there? It becomes quite difficult. There are a few things they've done. So sometimes when he has to come out and explain, is that there's not so much that you can do about it. It's like when you are dealing with a palliative case. We know that you are in a situation where there's not so much to do, but we will have to take time and explain so that it takes in. Look at Labor Day, for example. He took time to explain, this is where we are. As much as people got out of Uhuru Gardens not happy that there hadn't been an increment, which was quite ritualistic, and employers didn't even follow through after every declaration, he sat down, told us exactly where we are and where we are going. He's explained the housing levy, for example, that every time you pay for your fuel levy, you never say this is where it's going to be used. It's outside of your control, but this is the money that is going to you. But then people really say, okay, as much as you've explained, it's still painful. So I need to say this, that it doesn't matter whoever would have taken on the 5th watch. The previous administration had run the credit card to completion, to exhaustion. So whoever came in, we had fully to the maximum. So you run the credit card, it's at the end, and then you hand over. So we are at a place where even if it were Raila Odinga today running government, he will face the same problems. The problems we face, I had somebody talk about cartels not being the right word. You see, people put out contaminated sugar, the sugar cartel. You know, people are actually addicted to sugar. After the mainstream drugs, or rather the official drugs as we define them, the other drug is sugar. All of us doing coffee here, there must be some sugar in it. The world is addicted to sugar. So the local sugar cartel takes contaminated sugar, puts it into the market, and once the police and the state starts investigating them, they quickly hoard sugar also anticipating the proposed taxes that are coming in, so that then they know that the government is wary of people crying and making noise about the cost of living. So they hoard the sugar, and once they hoard the sugar, there is public outcry, and they know that this particular government has already been assailed by opposition. So, you know, if you are going to, when we were young, we used to talk about that a small boy and a bigger boy. So this small boy will always chokoza the big boy, and then when the big boy wants to actually retaliate, he tells him, if you beat me, unanionea. Na ukiniacha unaniogopa. So the cartels are actually using the situation around here, so that when you people make noise about the sugar is up there, and then of course government goes slow on them. Okay. So William Ruto is actually in a very, very difficult situation, but then he has to do something about it. Because from where we are as a country, as even if it was Azimio today, they wouldn't do any magic here.
All right. So not everybody will be happy, but something has to be
something
done
has to be
at
done.
The end of the
and
day.
This is the government of the hustlers, because the alternative of this is that we will actually be in a situation where somehow the hustlers will suffer most, because other people are cushioned.
That's true. Okay. I mean, I hear you. Okay. All right. So we've not even had time to go through the other dailies because a lot had to be said. But very quickly, and then we'll come back to the subject of the conversation today. All right. So I'm holding the Standard, and of course the headline actually reads. But let me try and get that. No, we have the Business Daily Taifaleo, East African Seed of Gold, and okay. All right. So very quickly, what the the Business Daily says: bank accounts with over 100,000 shillings hit 1.9 million. Of course, the central bank reveals flight from small banks. KCB and CBA win high, quality accounts raise. I mean, there's so much that, you can go through the same. So I want to go through Taifaleo because, again, the headline is what's the subject of our conversation today. It says, he meoza, okay? And continues to say, that ripoti ya pamoja ya EACC na UN imefichua jinsi wafisadi katika wizara ya afya, magavana, madiwani na wanasiasa wengine wamekuwa wakigawana kandarasi kununua vifaa duni vya matibabu na kusababisha mamilioni ya Wakenya kukosa huduma na dawa katika hospitali za umma. And of course that story is on page 2 and this is as far as Taifaleo is concerned. And of course we really want to understand this because, again, like we said, the second, among top 2 most corrupt, ministry and as well as institution in the country. And of course, the big question is, what exactly is happening? Are there like so many loopholes, in the ministry really that brings about, makes it prone, right, as far as corruption is concerned? And this is not the first time. Even the previous, health CS, that is Mutahi Kagwe, said, there's a lot happening in the health ministry, and that is why we find ourselves where we are today. So, Jim, I'm going to begin with you as well. What exactly is happening?
I think the Ministry of Health perhaps hosts the most resilient corruption cartel in this country.
Okay.
It is, the level of resilience of that cartel is preposterous. Okay. They have somehow managed within the first 8 months of Kenya Kwanza's, these guys are trying to clean shop, as Maliba is saying. They're trying to do their level best to just, keep their head down, get the work going. But these guys have, because this is almost the 4th time that we are hearing of a Ministry of Health scandal. And they're all around the same issues. It's either at KEMSA, it's either something around the IFMIS, and all of them, there's always, politicians involved. The last one, there were accusations of very close members of the president's family. Right now, the accusations of a very close member of the current president's cabinet, and members of their family getting involved. I think at the end of the day, you have mosquito nets, for instance, that are not getting to where they need to be. We know how seriously hit some of our regions are with the whole conversation around malaria. If the president acted, say, on intelligence reports, I think my question would be, is it intelligence if it's coming after the fact? Okay. Is it really an intelligence report if it is coming after the fact? Or is it intelligence if we can close those loopholes? Because if it is a recurring thing, we can change the chairman and bring in, our good friend Nyakera. We can change the board membership. But still, it's the same thing that happened. We changed even the CS. We changed even the president. So there are serious structural issues that are going on there. And I know sometimes you don't like to look at the other side of it, which is where the money was coming from. And the money was coming from at least one of them was coming from a donor agency. Are there loopholes in these relationships that perhaps need to be sealed? Because I think for me, this is a very band-aid solution. Sort of like, it's a band-aid solution because we're sucking people, and that's good. It shows goodwill. It shows we're not going to stand this. But we have to go beyond that. We have to go to the point of saying, okay, one, our intelligence gathering has to actually do. It has to be intelligent, in that it has to inform us before the fact. But also, number two, if there are loopholes within the IFMIS system, then that has to be sorted out. A lot of them, there are procurement issues, which you're being told the PS wrote and the CS. You know, why is this happening in the 21st century, where we are saying, you know, there was serious, but the CS was not aware? By the way, I think one of the things that Kenyans have to know that the CS was not aware of any of these things happening, and they are totally innocent in this matter. And it is only the person, the PS, who is in charge of incurring expenditure, who knew what was happening. Was there a lull in whoever was, you know, if you're saying the buck stops with the president as the CEO of the country, the buck also stops with the CS,
with the CS as well,
as the one who has, you know, they might not be incurring expenditure, but the buck also ought to stop, to stop with them. So I think at the end of the day, if we are going to enable these guys, because as I've said, it is the guys that we've sent home they will go home and you're bringing in new ones. The new ones who come in, we have not sorted out the procurement issues. No one, we don't see any new policy statement and saying, look, our procurement laws are flawed. We are giving too much power to individuals within ministries to single-handedly source or single-handedly, or our procurement processes are not rigorous enough. We might need to do something around the public, you know, the procurement law. So that for me is that it has to go beyond what you're seeing in the public statements. And perhaps it is happening, to be honest. We have to give them the benefit of the doubt. He said, is it intelligence if he shares it with us? So perhaps there's a lot more going on in the background that we don't know.
All right. Okay. Hezbollah, curious what you have to say. The cartels, according to Jim, are very resilient.
Well, I think you can actually say that the cartels are very resilient because of the manifestations. I mean,
of
you
what
can't
you're
just
seeing now.
of what you're seeing.
But
I think there's a deeper subplot to it. It's not the cartels. I think it's the way the politicians have fashioned the terrain to allow the cartels to hoover around, so that once you get into office, then they become your cartels, or the loopholes are not sealed, so that you germinate another crop of cartels. That is what we are seeing. I mean, we cannot run away from the fact that this is not just the accounting officers' issues. There is a political subplot to it. There are politicians who are involved pushing, you know. And it is not enough to send people home. I can tell you it's not enough to send people home, and in the manner in which they've been sent home, with intelligence that we are not privy to. I think if that intelligence had informed, you know, a very robust mechanism for dealing with such cases, would rest easy. But we can't rest easy, because today they'll send people home in Kemsa, it will happen somewhere, they'll send people home, and then we won't have recourse to understand now to what extent have we sealed the loopholes. And I would say this, that I mean, it's incumbent upon a president who wants to fight corruption to put in place systems and the right people, so that if you sack people or send people home, the systems will be enduring. But for as long as we're not talking about the system, for as long as we're not talking about those loopholes that these cartels are taking advantage of, for as long as you're not going deeper to see now to what extent, you know, you can say that Hezbollah is culpable, but if you don't address where are the gaps that Hezbollah took advantage of, then you're not addressing anything. The person who will replace Hezbollah will just come in and they'll be told, don't worry.
This is
we've sanitized this by sending someone home, but this is the route. So we have to be discreet about going about, you know, the whole process. But you know, the critical thing about corruption is not that money is being stolen, because people think that money is being stolen. I think the critical thing about corruption is capital flight. That when you steal money in hundreds of millions, either you will stash it outside of this country, or you will hold it somewhere among the very rich, you know, the top people who can work with millions in gunias, like we saw with some governors in the previous dispensation. So unless we deal with it decisively, even these measures that you're putting in place, you tax people more. If there are people who are going to steal it in droves, then that taxation will not benefit people in this country, because then you'll have a lot of money for people to steal and send them to offshore accounts. Capital flight, brain drain, malaria is very serious because malaria affects pregnant women a lot more than people know today. And when you deal with that, you're affecting the entire health value chain, that the doctors who are dealing with these women, the families where these women are coming from, will suffer the consequences of just a few people who decided that you're going to use these loopholes, steal money, and then of course maybe the people who are supporting them will send them home and still retain these loopholes. So from what I see, I think the president has to be very decisive and deal with those loopholes. That is one. And then number two, there has to be a framework that is predictable. We have to know that if it is happening in your ministry, this is what will happen to these particular officers. Because, I mean, a few years ago, we were talking about the CS has to be held accountable. Today, we are talking about the chief accounting officer, who is the principal, the PS. And then you also have two PSs. And there is also a lot of mystery around who was in charge and who was not in charge.
I was not there, I did not sign, I did not,
so, you know, those gray areas are the ones that possibly tell you that it's not just about corruption, but there is a political subplot that is complicit, you know, and supporting these cartels who seem to be enduring.
Very resilient. Yes. All right, Kidi, I'm curious what you have to say as well, because this is not the first time that, you know, we're having, you know, KEMSA scandal, right? Has been there, you know, the former president, that is President Uhuru Kenyatta, you know, when we had, you know, another case as far as KEMSA scandal is concerned, he, you know, ordered for investigation and, you know, the people held accountable to, you know, bear the consequences. But really, up until now, we've not seen, you know, any of those things, you know, done. So is it that we're fighting a losing battle?
I think that the question is, are we fighting a losing battle?
Okay.
I think there are things, if we do not do, then certainly we will be fighting a losing battle.
Okay.
Because I want us to have, to briefly look at how the war on corruption has been fashioned in Kenya. To begin with, you know, we have very robust anti-corruption laws.
Okay.
Someone tells me that our anti-corruption laws are only second to the ones in Netherlands. So that in the whole of Africa, I think we are the country with very sophisticated laws. Then secondly, look at our criminal justice system. We have some of the best minds. But then look at how we do the war on corruption. It is like everyone employed either at the EACC or charged with the war on corruption was at some point an ecologist, as senior Wachira Maina would put it.
Okay.
That they seem to be employing the recapture method. That you go to the ecology, capture a few people, keep them in, you mark them, then release them again.
Okay.
So that, for instance, look at the under Uhuru administration. At some point, there are people who were told were corrupt. These people were corrupt, were arrested. Then, of course, they got out on bail. A few months down the line, all these people were out.
Okay.
So then you ask yourself, what is it that we have not done? You look at the Kibaki administration, and you will agree with me that the question of political will was seriously lacking, at least in the first term, so that by the time Kibaki was trying to put his foot down, damage was so extensive. That is why he had to lose Mwiraria, he had to lose Murungaru. I think at some point he nearly lost Moody. So it is imperative for the president to be decisive, even to send the message to his allies that if you are in my administration and you are willing to dip your finger in the cookie jar, then no sacred cow will be tolerated within my administration. That was very important. Someone would say that, but Uhuru also demonstrated this in 2015. By the time President Uhuru was attempting to act on corruption in 2015, it was 2 years down the line. Also, the damage was extensive, and even the enormity of those scandals. I want us to look at the health sector in what it could do to this country if managed properly, if we are able to obliterate the monster of corruption. Today, we are, I think, we are one of the countries in East Africa with fairly good healthcare infrastructure, in spite of what we think is our mess. So that at least we know that we have had a head of state in the East African region who had to come seek healthcare within our borders. Unfortunately, he lost the fight. We also remember that when one of the leading opposition figures in the region was shot, that the only place that had the sophisticated healthcare that could take care of him at that point in time was within our borders.
Okay.
So I think that look at what healthcare tourism has done to Turkey. So that if out of the 2 million tourists we receive per year who pay 10,000 park fees, we were able to revolutionize our healthcare using technology to ensure that people who are willing to take advantage of the KEMSAs of this world are stopped.
Okay.
So that we have people trooping into our borders to pay top dollar for healthcare. Okay. I think that alone would create a massive foreign income earner.
Okay.
So I think that the decisiveness of the president is imperative. It should not be condemned. And the people who are condemning it, I don't think that by the president sending someone home that it stops the normal channels of the law from taking effect.
Yeah.
Like, you know, someone speaking to his innocence. I think that it's just like now that has ended. So that if and when someone is found that he was innocent or she was innocent, I think still the law would has got lots of remedies.
Okay.
Thank you very
for
much.
the same. All right. And of course, Arnold, again, for you, in terms of, yes, there is measures that have been to be taken, really, you know, at the end of the day, to hold those people who, you know, are sort of like accused to be held accountable, right?
Yes.
But the big question is, you know, the whole aspect of, you know, structural differences, because like Jim said,
Yes.
you know, at the end of the day, you might suspend this person, right?
Yes,
you might sack this person, but the system remains the same, such that another person who's coming in sort of like gets into that system, gets sucked into the system and told, listen, this is how things, you know, run here, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't matter how many people you bring into the helm, for example, of cancer, at the end of the day, there's a way that things are done, which is what we're saying needs to be sort of like, you know, tackled.
Let me say something briefly before my brother comes
very
in.
quickly, okay.
I was cautious not to repeat what my brothers had said.
Yes.
For instance, what Jim says is very important.
Yeah.
That how can we ensure that we obliterate that cartel, that infrastructure that permits a few people year in, year out to siphon money and from these institutions and at the expense of the people of Kenya. So that over and above that, let political will be demonstrated that we shall not have the sacred cows in the war against corruption.
Okay, all right, Arnold?
I think the problem within the KEMSA or the medical system is, for me, there are three issues. Number one is devolution. Number two is what everybody else wants to call the systemic problems. But then there is also the cultural aspect that we are avoiding talking about, and which decisions, the immediate action has actually been witnessed, actually speaks to the culture. Because there's been this understanding. You know, Wakili Kidi has actually said very well that we've got a very robust framework, a legal and policy framework around that, that works quite very well. Sometimes you realize that people will talk about laws and policies until you get into that particular sector and you realize that it's overregulated. There's too much policies around that. So that has never been a problem. So there's the place that is systemic. You cannot come up with laws that are not compliant to the Constitution 2010. We have got a very robust Bill of Rights. So as much as you will try to come out with ways of dealing with these issues, just remember that at the very apex, the end, or rather the authority at the very apex, is the Constitution of Kenya, which in and of itself is actually very progressive, very dynamic, and there are just a few things you can't do. People would want to see people who've stolen, shot, and killed. You can't do that under the Constitution, but we have that. So, speaking to the cultural end of it, is that now there must be the place of goodwill. Again, arguing about systemic issues and laws is, in my opinion, quite defeatist. We've seen a lot of times when there was sufficient political goodwill, action being taken. So you do not have to feel like the Jubilee and the handshake government saying that we are not able to fight corruption because of the laws. So we have to change the laws, even during the days when we had a dictatorship. Actually a functional dictatorship, and the president had a free hand to do whatever he wanted, we still didn't defeat corruption. So we are a democracy, we are a functional democracy, we are a country under the rule of law. We cannot run away from that. But there are a few things you can do. When you are suspended pending investigation, it means that you are giving room. It's a practice across the world. So rather than people sit there, by the time you say that there is no sufficient information, I've seen Wheeler talk about it as intelligence information. It's not. By the time the media is reporting, it's no longer intelligence.
It's no longer intelligence.
It's no longer. By the time the media, we are learning these things through the media. there is already outcry when we're talking about sugar. Actually, a lot of these actions for me are late. It's quite late because by the time...
We shouldn't be here in the first place.
By the time the media is reporting, somebody within the governance structure knew about it. What action was done? So, whereas we laud the president for doing what he's done, you know, the buck stops with him. A lot of times he gets to know these things at the tail end. He gave his officers, you know, it's 8 months since he came to power. We know that he's just completing. He's not completely organized his government. He's just taken care of the security. He's dealt with the executive. One more aspect remains, and that is the foreign affairs. That hasn't been touched. At least now even the National Security Council has actually taken shape. The military formed up, the police taken care of, the cabinet is in place. We have got... you realize there was almost a lackluster. For the last 6 months, there wasn't so much. You felt like nothing much was moving. So he gave them room. No one is going to actually say that people are being sent home without being given some fair room to actually defend themselves. You've been here for the last 6 months. So clearly there has been conversations in the cabinet and elsewhere. Jim spoke about a resilient cartel. You know, Mafia House. You know, Mafia House for the longest time was referred to Mafia House. One of the reasons actually it's very resilient is because it's the cartel of the learned. You know, in this country, unlike in India, where actually they are leading when it comes to health tourism, medical tourism, you realize that in India, you do not necessarily have to be the top student to do medicine. You remember the late Professor Magoha saying that so long as you can get a C+, you can do any course and do it very well. So in those other places, by the way, they pick guys who have got a drive and you meet the minimum and you are trained. So they've got a surplus of medic in that particular end. A lot of the facilities our people live here to go in India, you would be surprised, they're not very big facilities. Some of them, even Nation Center in itself is quite big. As in when I'm talking about the Twin Towers here, it's quite big. The places where our people go are some to small things, but then they have got the personnel, the equipment, and of course, things around that. So, when we're talking about the malaria program, again, there's been a word around that the wrong PS was sent home and everything else. I saw a panelist trying to, I know he knows that's why he didn't actually go full length, but he was actually implying. You know, the wrong person was the National Malaria Program is under the PS who was actually sent home. Then there's the place of the AIE holder. Then all of us know exactly what the CS, the role the CS plays. We're also pretending that PSS have not been frustrating CSS in this particular administration. One of the reasons why some of these PSS have actually been swapped has not been no one wants them in the department they're in. They're either squabbling with the minister, a lot of infightings where even PSS have denied CSS fuel. So, and the president is just giving them marching orders. He's firing a warning shot that this cannot go on. You know, mosquito remains man's ancient enemy. That for the longest time we've lived as human beings, and remember, the deadliest enemy to mankind has not been any other thing, it's been the mosquito. In Kenya, we have got 3.5 million cases, clinical cases that are actually reported every year. And malaria causes about 11 million deaths in this country annually. So it's a big issue, and NETS actually reduced that almost to 70%. So they've been working very well. So when we are trying to actually reduce this 11,000 deaths per year, doing away with, and by the time you're putting in, you know, 3.5 million people is actually 6% of the population. So when you have got a 6% of the population at some point down because of malaria, you lose on manpower, you're putting in a lot of money. Some of these things, the preventive medicine, or rather the preventive intervention is actually quite effective. So this wasn't a small thing. It was actually a big thing. But then we go around, and as usual, the guys in Mafia House decided that for them, they know no fear of God. They know no end. So we are at a place where William is actually teaching them a little fear of God, as in if you realize that you fear neither God nor man, then we can meet halfway. So whatever he's doing, I think, for me, is still laudable, because we do not need to change the law. You know, the process of changing the policy and legal framework to accommodate some of these things, it will take a very long time. So while we are waiting for that, can we do what we can and now, instead of tomorrow, or rather waiting? Like I said, the previous administration, the fight against corruption was twofold. It was a talking point and it was a political tool. But here, this is an action point, and so at least I can do what I can on my end. If the courts go out there and change, then you don't say that I didn't do anything about it. Also, the cultural end of it is actually serious, that people will know that if you've been given a job, do your job. There are enough Kenyans who can do the job that you have. So you're not a sacred cow. You are, as a chairperson of our parastatal, and that brings me to the last point on this.
Okay, very quickly.
One of these things that actually allowed the president was actually bringing in a guy called Simon Indimuli to become the secretary of SCAC. One of the biggest problems we have with parastatals has been that the corporate governance element with boards, CEOs, just like PSs, have become quite big-headed. So you can be appointed to the board today and call your CEO 100 times and he wouldn't pick that. CEOs are not calling boards. They are just rubber stamping, and then the board is told, you guys are at policy level, they're supposed to be doing oversight. Some of these things. So boards will become serious. They will not be given holidays in Mombasa and given trips so that then they do not follow the running of parastatals. They are supposed to be there to work. So SCAC needs to actually be strengthened. People are talking about systemic issues. In the last administration, we totally killed SCAC. And even the Inspectorate of State Corporations, they were really done, or rather they were really understaffed, no resources and everything else. So the element of SCAC and ICSC were being run from State House, which was actually very wrong. So now having somebody who is a practitioner in that particular sector like Indimuli now, being the secretary of SCAC, literally the people who know how that thing runs very well. I think he's only second to Kinyua on the other end. So I think that with SCAC having been strengthened, we are hoping that the Inspectorate of State Corporations also, of course, coming from SCAC, will actually get the strength to work seriously. So that board members are not given jobs, and then for them just to be called director and then go to Mombasa. And then finally, or finally on the same is the Kenya School of Government.
Okay. All right.
You know why we're saying that? Those are all systemic.
Yes. But for a very long time, we've had a lot of different institutions saying, listen, we can only go up to this point, right? We do not have, we're not strengthened enough, quote unquote, to do our job. We can only go up until this far. EACC can, do its work up until this point. And then, the other institution takes from here up to this point. And I think that is why we're having a bit of...
That is the reason why I actually wanted to do the finally or finalism.
Okay, the finalism.
I wanted to bring in Kenya School of Government. You see, before we talk about EACC, the problem of governance is about capacity, is about boards being able, because why do boards exist? A lot of them for governance element in these parastatals, like KEMSA, for example. So you bring in board members, and some of them you're bringing them from the private sector who have not really socialized with the way the public sector works. So we also need to go back and ensure that Kenya School of Government becomes what it's supposed to be. Build the capacity of these people who are coming in. You have seen PSS and CSS saying things that shouldn't be said. Where is the Kenya School of Government into this? I think there's... going to Kenya School of Government is not posturing outside of Margaret Kobia Hall and taking a photo and then framing it and sharing. We must actually see that particular training reflecting that. So with SCAC strengthened, Inspectorate of State Corporations strengthened, we need to see now Kenya School of Government actually ensuring that we see government functioning as government. That is why Kenya School of Government exists.
In the first place. All right. So Jim, then how about we go to the basics, all right? And the whole question about tenders, right? And of course, the whole question about procurement. I mean, there has to be a structure followed, right? There has to be a way that these things operate, so that we don't get ourselves to this point where, for example, the whole question about the PPEs, right? There's a conversation around overpricing, of the same. Investigations done into the same, nothing is comes forth and we hear today then another scandal and then another scandal and another scandal because some of the structures were not properly followed. So then who is responsible for that? Because this institution will say, listen, us, we did our part up until this point, right? And then the other institution says, yes, we did our part up until this point. So then leaves a bit of, loopholes that becomes difficult to get the persons accountable.
I think on top of everything else that we are saying, we must also address ourselves to our national bad manners. As a people, that we are generally good churched people, or good of Muslim faith, good ones. We regularly attend service or attend prayers here and there, but in private, there is a serious appetite for loot. And many have said that we are just thieves without the opportunity to steal. And we have seen, demonstrated time and again, that when the opportunity presents itself, like if a tanker falls on the road, we run there very fast to sip on the fuel.
Okay.
If an EABL truck falls down, we run very fast to take the beer.
Yeah.
And so the opportunity presented itself and we take it. And we've seen this bad manners taken into public office.
Yeah.
That there's a perception all across the board that government is a place to go on a spree. You don't know how long it will last. You don't know how long you'll be in government. You don't know when your time will end. So amass as much as possible.
All right.
And so it's speaking to a values question that we can legislate everything else, but sometimes it's hard to legislate bad manners.
Okay.
Those are things that, you know, kama ukufunzwa na mama yako utafunzwa na ulimwengu. It's one of those. It's one of those situations. But if you think about EACC, for instance, who are supposed to be sort of, you know, the guardians of this, the ones who are taking charge of that entire values question. We've constantly done this very progressive thing of putting in good bishops in there, right? My former bishop, Olisapit, was the chair. Not Olisapit, Wabukala. I might be praying that Olisapit. Okay. Olisapit is my current bishop.
All right.
Yeah, and Wabukala was there, did his time, kept his head down. We never had much from him. And now we have Oginde. Bishop Oginde as the chair, and it's often looked like this place where it needs a lot of prayers.
Yeah.
To deal with corruption, we don't just need the technical expertise. We need intercessors.
Yeah.
And so we constantly put in intercessors in there. But as you've seen, EACC have often said that they're not able to do much beyond report. Give us, like right now they're telling us MOH is the second most corrupt ministry. They're not telling us the first one though.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people wondering.
Isn't it obvious? The first one.
I think they have really insisted, and the media have run with the narrative of the second.
The second.
But the question is, who's the first? Let's just mention them.
Okay.
It's been defending them.
And so I think EACC, for me, has, number one, they have to be the place. But then you have all these other institutions. You have the Auditor General, who often comes and gives us reports. And because of our laziness also of reading some of these reports, we go by what the media says. So the auditor comes and gives a report and says, you know, the County X did not spend this much money, and so we cannot account for it. But the explanations as to what that means, and often we say 200 billion has been stolen, whereas there was actually a very clear explanation. It's not all the time that money is lost when the auditor's report comes out. And then, you know, you have the controller of budget, for instance. So we have, as Kinamani was saying, you have all these regulations around the place that seem to have been meant to keep this watertight, because we are coming from a place where we had land as a nation. And so when we had the new constitution, you have the Public Finance Management Act, we were coming from a place where we had land and said we have to regulate this place, over-regulate it, close all loopholes. But somehow there's a human element to it, the values question. And that for me is where the EACC comes in, that we cannot allow people with questionable pasts into public office. We've seen, for instance, how this president, unfortunately, has appointed so many people with questionable track records, who have been mentioned in several parliamentary reports. Some even had pending cases until the good DPP, who has now been promoted, dropped their cases for lack of evidence. For lack of evidence.
All right.
And so you have it's you know, capture recaptures, you say, where you have these guys who have done all this mess in the country, but somehow they find their way back. They find their way back in. And somehow we hope that they will behave well.
Or they have learnt their lesson.
Somehow we hope that miraculously, because they are mentioned in Aurora and Kimorere Dam scandal, they will miraculously perform wherever they have been reappointed. I mean, it's madness where we do the same thing.
expect
different results. Okay, Jim, how about we take a break because we need to pay our bills and then come back and then get to understand. So then is it time that we change, you know, how then first of all we get these people into power, right? And if they get themselves into those positions, so then what needs to be done to make sure that they are held accountable? Do we do like, you know, monthly or quarterly checks just to see, are you doing your part? Are you not doing your part? What needs to be done? Of course, all that conversation is coming up after the break. Stay with us.
Gosh, it is so small. We thought that it was a colobus monkey, but it's actually a bush baby. So, Eric, what exactly happened to it?
Pata taarifa teke na e-paper. Stay in the know on the go. Getting the full story bilangori. To sign up, choose your preferred subscription. Use the promo code SUBZ22 to get 20% off and pay. Get your favorite newspaper and enjoy the truth anywhere, anytime. For inquiries, email epaper@ke.nationmedia.com or call 0790 111 111. Subscribe today and get your taarifa teke.
Yo, but true say the sharp god up in the mix. Now I'm saying NTV, shout out to you, bro. Keep it locked. Hey.
Sauti yako ina sound vizuri kwenye masikio.
I like it. Come to the dance floor, babe.
Angie.
Leo tuna festa fe banga.
Festa fe banga. Another banga.
And it's just like an amazing mix.
I am happy today. Kama vitu unanilea. Oh yeah. Inaweka shida chini na tupa mikono juu. Banjuka tu.
No compromise, this the hottest combo.
Unistima, uninare. Mix on NTV. Don't touch that dial. Not yet. No wagwate.
With Molfix pants, changing diapers is now very easy. I tear and take off the used Molfix pants and pull the new one up in a moment. Wrap up the used diaper and throw it away. Come on, mothers, try Molfix baby pants and be part of our happiness movement.
Safaricom congratulates Ferdinand Omanyala on his fantastic win at the Absa Kipkeino Classic.
Tunukiwa na Safaricom. Chagua bei yako ya kupiga simu au data. Piga *444# au utembelee My Safaricom app upate deal poa ya kupiga simu. Uongee zaidi au ubrowse zaidi.
This is NTV.
Alrighty, welcome back, and of course we are in the last few minutes you know, of the show, and this is as far as AM Live is concerned. And of course the big question is the graft. All right, the big elephant in the room. It's not the first time that we're talking about corruption right here in the country. We have had this term over and over again, that we're saying at the end of the day, it's like most of the Kenyans have sort of like accepted. We have normalized corruption and say, you know what, this is Kenya. And I'm pretty sure you've had a lot of people say that, you know, that this is Kenya. So what do we do? Do we change tactic? We've seen the president again doing a raft of measures. There's also the whole question about, you know, the reshuffling, just to make sure that things are working well. But the big question is this enough? Is the president able to fight corruption? A term that we have had over and over and over again. And of course, I'm just going to throw this to you, Hezbollah, right? Is the president able to do that now? Given that even the previous regime, where again, corruption was an everyday talk, right? He was in that regime. And we have seen him try do this, do that, but at the end of the day, here we are today, still talking about corruption. Is he able to deliver on the same?
Well, I don't think it's a question of whether he's able to deliver. It's a question of how is he going to deliver it.
Okay.
I mean, he has the power to do that in the next 4 years and a few months.
All right.
And for me, the question we need to ask ourselves, Kenyans are brought up well. I mean, this issue of culture is for me, is neither here nor there. I mean, Kenyans are brought up well. We are very cultured people. We've gone to school. We have some of the best, brains around here. And I think our law is very comprehensive. I mean, we have a very progressive constitution with an extensive Bill of Rights, meaning that no one can victimize you. You have enough rights. And that's the reason why most of the corruption cases can take years, because people have rights. But, all this is a question of goodwill. Political goodwill. And I think that is within the domain of the president. He can create that political environment that allows every other Kenyan to know that if you're corrupt, there's going to be retributive justice, and it's going to be as immediate as possible, so that we see the consequences. And I think for me, we may want to talk about the law is good, we have agencies and all that, but I think that is the problem that we have. That we have the law, but we've not found a way of operationalizing the law. Arnold here will mention me again. I will be surprised if he doesn't, because he said that I talked about information. If the media already has it, then it's no longer intelligence. Now, the fact that the media already has it means that it is information that is meant for the public domain. And what I mean is this, that if there is a way we are going to give political goodwill, it has to borrow from the legal framework, both the Constitution and the Acts of Parliament, including the jurisprudence that we've established, the case laws, and come up with a policy so that we know that this is the way we are fighting corruption. That if there is a corruption incident in this ministry, in these government agencies, in Parliament, if someone has been mentioned, they have a right in the Bill of Rights. But this is how the process will look like. And I think that is where politics comes in. That there has to be clarity that this is the accounting officer, this is the process in which they'll be held culpable, this is the person who the buck stops with, this is how he's going to be held accountable, and this is what has to happen. So when people are told to step aside or suspended because the due process is taking place, we need to understand, what does that process look like? So that if it is a principal in a high school, what happens? If it is a cabinet secretary, what happens? So clarity. And it has to borrow from the law so that there is a clear policy that everyone understands. And then number two, it's about time. We've talked about corruption. Corruption has been in the media. We've seen big political figures go to EACC, arraigned by the DCI. But what we've seen also is that they've been accompanied by other political leaders who are supporting their cause. And that has given the impression that it pays to be corrupt, that you'll be strode the corridors of power, you'll be protected by people in power. And we've all seen this narrative propagated when these people end up winning elective positions, which has entrenched the culture of, if you have an opportunity to be corrupt, be corrupt. But there are so many Kenyans outside there who are not corrupt. Where is their story? We have to start, rather than say that, it's our culture. There are people who are cultured. There are so many people in government institutions who refused to be corrupt. And you see, the problem with these people is that now they are a threat to other people. And it makes them live in some, some bubble that is fairly risky. So they can't leave, they can't talk because now they are perceived to be the insiders who are, leaking information to the media about guys who are corrupt. So we have to start talking about stories of successes, people who have refused to use public office to benefit themselves. And number two, we also need to find a way of creating a balance. Rather than blow these stories of people who've been suspended, people who've been arraigned in court, we may want to mute those stories and focus on have they been convicted. So that ultimately that child growing up in Suna East, where I come from, gets to know that this person was corrupt. And this is what has happened to the person.
To them.
But finally, let me just say that in the last regime,
yes.
And my friend here, and we come from the same county, Kidi, had mentioned that maybe President Uhuru Kenyatta started late, and he's my small brother. But even in starting late, I think in President Uhuru Kenyatta's regime, he had control of the executive, and he came up with a measure that if you're part of the executive and you are mentioned and you are arraigned in court, you will have to step aside.
Step aside, yes.
Whether that is still tenable or not, I don't know. But at least we knew that when President Uhuru Kenyatta was in office, if you are mentioned and you are in the executive, out. Definitely. And we saw people go out. You know, and you see the government business is the business of the people. If that was working, it sent cabinet secretaries and their principal secretaries home. And now there is a backlog in the judicial process. That's what we need to see, and it needs to be predictable that the president has given a decree that is within the law. He has not contravened any law. That this is what will happen if you are mentioned. You know, and the moment you're mentioned, we know you're not guilty. Now the due process has to take place. But we have to see some sort of retribution that is consistent and can be applied across board.
Absolutely. All right. Can we then talk about interference? Because I think for a very long time we've had the whole conversation about this interference, you know, from, the political class. And then we talked about also the strengthening of these institutions that are responsible to make sure that people who are, mentioned and they are, accused, they need to be charged. We need to see prosecutions happening. But up until now, no one has been prosecuted so far. So this, and the president was very clear just recently, during his meeting with journalists, right? And he said, I'm not going to give a call, right? And I have never ever called someone to tell them how to do their job or, acquit this person because of this, and all that. But at the end of the day, will we ever get to that point of there's no political interference, every institution functions as it's supposed to function?
Thank you, Winnie. First, we must appreciate the difficult and the unholy alliance between politics and corruption.
All right.
Because if you hear, we cannot talk about corruption today, especially big corruption, without speaking about state capture. So that you realize that you can only achieve state capture, that is when you capture power, the presidency, you capture the security sector, the intelligence, and then you capture treasury, you capture the money. You cannot do any of that without having political power. But then when you speak about institutions, you know that there is a reason why the people of Kenya, in their infinite wisdom or lack of it, but I suspect it is the wisdom.
That is the wisdom, okay.
When they decided to remove prosecutorial powers from the AG chambers and set it up as an independent institution. In the last couple of years, when we've had the outgoing DPP at the helm, we have had, mixed results. Mixed results because there was a robust war on corruption, especially during the early days of handshake. And then for a moment, everyone was sitting back hoping that this was a genuine war on corruption. So the DCI did its work, or let's believe so. Then arrested people, Kamata Fridays became the norm. So, but then when the DPP also in his infinite wisdom approved those charges and took people to court. Only for people to be acquitted, these cases to die quietly years later, which speaks to what I was saying earlier of the capture-recapture. If what my brother Owila Esbon is saying that it was effective, why did they destroy people's lives? You know how Kenya it works. So that today as I am here, if for whatever reason the police arrest me and takes me to court, I may not even be able to appear again on AM Live. So that there are people who are civil servants, and we were told that they were corrupt, that they were holding the greatest responsibility. So the DCI did its work, the DPP did its work. When the matter went to court, we were told that most of these cases did not have sufficient evidence to charge in the first place. So the question is, why did we destroy people's lives? As we go on with this conversation about corruption, that the institutions must be able to deliver, and deliver so strictly in a manner bearing in mind that when they charge the wrong person, there is a whole lot of people whose lives are disrupted. Imagine their children. imagine their families, imagine their village mates, people whom they were supporting. So I think that if, as we will be having the new DPP, he or she must know that his work is cut out for him or her. That never again should we arrest people and take them to court when in the first place we do not have evidence. Thank you. My brother wants to respond.
He's mentioned me out of
I will.
but let me just clarify.
Okay.
One, if you look at the footages of what I've been saying on air, I was against Kamata Friday.
Okay.
And what I've said is there are so many institutions. So you have the office of the DPP, you have ESCC, you have DCI, and they have different responsibilities, you know. And of course now you have State House. We've always had State House. Now the issue of Kamata Friday was so unpredictable. And why would we even Kamata people on Friday when they don't know that they're going to be arrested? So when I say there has to be a systemic framework, policy framework, so that you know that this is what will happen if you are culpable. And culpability does not mean that you've been proven in a court of law. And then number two, let me also remind him that I said that we have to go slow on publicizing these people. And the reason why I say that is because you don't disrupt people's careers when they're mentioned in corruption cases. You actually destroy their careers and so many other people. It's the reason why even the media has to be alive to the fact that someone has been suspended, they need to frame that story within context. It doesn't mean that that person is culpable and guilty. And that has to come from a political goodwill and a policy that is very consultative. How do we cover corruption? How do we deal with corrupt individuals? And how do we ensure that the way these individuals are dealt with does not destroy their lives and the lives of their loved ones and does not encourage people to be corrupt? I think that can come out from a very consultative process that is politically engineered and brings on board different voices in fighting corruption.
All right. I mean, we usually call for like tougher measures, tougher, action has to be taken so that someone learns their lesson, so that even like the generations to come will know that if you do this, what exactly you're saying, these are the consequences. So sort of like, try and mitigate that. But Arnold?
It's just important to underscore that the place of culture, the place of what Jim called national bad manners, you cannot divorce it from how we go about this particular issue, because whatever way you look at systems, systems do not function on their own. There is even the law, as it were, the force of the law doesn't find home without a human element to it. So the place of culture is important. We are a country that necessarily does not give heed to some of these things. I'll tell you, I have been on a board before, and I know that once you get in some of these places, when you meet people who are closer to you, civilians to say, they will tell you, na usitoke bure. Ukiingia kwa serikali utoke na kitu. When you go and do well and you come on TV and tell people, mimi sikuiba, I did my work very well. No one celebrates you. You say, this one was stupid because he went there and never came back. So we cannot run away from that. But I actually think William Ruto will actually excel in fighting corruption because, number one, he didn't overpromise. And he even didn't say he'll do it. He just told you that there will be no money to steal in my him. We even went around, coined it and played around. When you're fighting corruption, there are three things that you are dealing with. Number one, of course, there is the opportunity. Like when you're in government, you have got the opportunity. Then there is, of course, the pressure, the motivation. You want to get rich. Then, of course, there is always the justification and the rationalization. Now, that's where the legalese comes in. Okay, I did that because the law says, the law allows, the system is everything. Sometimes we blame a lot of these things when it's just bad manners. So William has got all the characteristics to deal with this issue, because let's deal with the three human beings in the corruption sector. Number one, we are what you people call the lords of graft. Lords of graft. These are the warlords in that particular sector. They could be the owners of capital, people making big deals, and they know how to go around. So that he actually has already come out, and even by winning an election, that those people who will actually tell that we are the people with money, we are the powers, we will teach you where you belong, he already has dealt with that. The other element is actually these lords of impunity. There's people specifically who deal with impunity. So there is graft, there is the place of impunity, and number three, of course, there is the ethnicity. I'll come back to that. So I want to call to the lords of impunity, the utaduwot guys. They pull out guns in places, they do all manner of things, and you do nothing. They use the wrong side of the road. they can build without approvals, and you do nothing about it. When civil servants try to reach out, state officers try to reach out, they are told, you do, as in, what will you do? Remember the CS Health yesterday saying that she even called somebody when these issues were actually running out. She's asking a junior officer who told her it cannot be done. You know, that is the place of impunity. And then the last one, I spoke about the ethnicity, loads of ethnicity, tribal loads. Because tribalism for us has been this particular bulletproof that we use, so that you can steal, and then and you see that being played so much around here, that so because so and so has been suspended and he comes from this tribe X, then we are being targeted as a people. Again, I think William Ruto stands much better because he rose to power not so much on the wings of tribalism, and he brought up the hustler narrative, which a lot of people, including Owila, were not very happy when I was discussing.
You expect him to mention your
He said so. There is a confirmation bias here, so I have to echo it. He has to answer home. But at that particular time, the hustler narrative, he tried to cross and breach ethnicity as the only political organizing philosophy in this particular country. So he can deal with tribalism. It's a way we cover up for our graft. For impunity, he's just decided that I know it's bad to give this example, but you remember when Waititu was the MP for Embakasi, and there was anytime there was land grabbing, he used to say that justice, the Embakasi style, is that we do it immediately as we wait for the police to do other things. So there's the immediacy in how he's doing it. Initially, presidential action would wait for so long. And somehow people knew, the rationalizing system knew that we would buy time until such a time as it's gone away. By the way, there are cases where civil servants tell PSS, utatuacha hapa. Ulitupata hapa na utatuacha hapa. It is so common. So people must now know that you will not get it easier. And finally,
finally, like in literally 5 seconds.
Yes, this is the final one. I have to deal with that because it's important. Yes. I saw, I don't know whether it was Jim or Wheeler, who said that we've seen people with questionable stuff and everything else have actually been brought in.
Yes.
You know, I think William Ruto believes in this, that if I have promised you something, I will give you. But how you get your job is not how you will keep it. That you could be my friend, we have worked with you through the campaigns, I appointed you, because the people he's firing are people there are people he has fired, like boards, PS. These are people he said, as in there was no other way about it. We send you home and bring in a new one. We are not giving you like any other room to eat. Where he has got the express power, like on boards. When you serve on a board, by the way, a good corporate governance teacher will tell you, I'm talking about public parastatal boards, is that you sit there at the president's pleasure. So at least where he has got the final say, he sent guys home. So on that particular end, he's done quite well. That you come in, I'll give you a job, yes. And those people have got their rights. Like I said, we have got a very robust bill of rights. So you are not going to deny me because I was mentioned. And sometimes you are mentioned because you are tasked to mobilize people who come to a conference. So the only way you are there, and because journalists are trying to build a story, you need a 400-word news piece. And you don't know how to go about, so you say, and then Owila was the one who was given the mandate to mobilize the people who attended. For him, he just mobilized. He didn't know there was money being stolen. But because he's mentioned, then do we deny him a chance to serve? No. So we will give you a job, yes. But how we give you the job is not how you will keep it. You will only keep your job by working. All right,
allow me to take that as your passing shot, because you will do finalists. Okay, but very quickly, this is what the president said very, very recently, and allow me to read that. He says, we'll try and cut off completely. So weaponization, right? Of the same, this is the whole aspect of political, interference with the same, but also a weaponization rather of the criminal justice system to fight corruption in his administration. So very quickly, in terms of what the president, what lies ahead of the president, because now everybody's looking at him. You said you will fight corruption. What is it that you're doing right now? Very quickly, in like 20 seconds. What lies ahead for the president?
I thought you were going to start with my brother Jim, but I was...
no, let's just finish, because he has done his
passing shot. Something like this.
20 seconds.
He can actually donate.
No, in 20 seconds, I think that the president is in the right place. One, he has demonstrated that it is not enough to be mentioned, to be denied an opportunity to serve in this country.
Okay.
Because if we were to go that direction, then we would deny so many people otherwise competent to serve an opportunity to serve because the executive, using the enormous resources at its disposal, would mention people's names, drag their names in mud, only so that they are not denied an opportunity to serve. Thank you.
All right. All right.
First, let me just debunk what Arnold has said
about
journalists.
We're not going back
about journalists. I mean, journalists are professionals.
Yes.
And I think the gatekeeping process is so rigorous.
Yeah. I mean, some of these cases would not have
yes,
had them
yes.
if
So when you say that journalists want to fill a 400 space with stories and they just write anything, I think he's demeaning this profession, which is very critical in a democracy.
Yeah.
They are researchers, they do their due diligence, and the moment a story is published, it is in the interest of the public and not individuals. But let me just say this. I mean, I think if the president succeeds in fighting corruption, it would be a good thing for this country. But where we are coming from, I think he has a lot of baggage in terms of the picture of what fighting corruption looks for him.
Okay.
It is enough to say that we need to protect individuals and not victimize people who were, arraigned in court, charged in the previous regime. If those cases were dropped, that is baggage. Because if these guys were arrested and there was no evidence, I think the best thing, the best legal advice they would get is then take this case through the due process until you are acquitted. You don't drop the cases, because what that comes out as is that it was political then, it is political now. You see, and you continue with the politicization of corruption. But finally, I think it is incumbent upon all Kenyans to support any initiative that will fight corruption. And I think on this, the president has allies, whether in opposition, people who voted for him or not. So the buck stops with him. He needs to take the goodwill and fight corruption.
All right, no excuses. All right, Jim, literally 15 seconds, because your 5 seconds have been stolen.
There was a time where the president's name and corruption was synonymous. He comes into the fight against corruption as an underdog. I think he is demonstrating progressively that he actually has what it takes to fight. I think what this government needs to do mostly is protect the whistleblowers, because those are critical people that they fight against corruption.
Absolutely.
If you can protect them and ensure that if I whistleblow, I will be protected, my identity will be protected, my family will be protected, then we are encouraging more Kenyans to come out and report cases of corruption in their ministries.
Absolutely. So all of us have a role to play, really, as far as fighting corruption is concerned. All right, Jim India, political analyst, Hezbollah Wheeler, media and political communications analyst, and of course we also had Kidi Mwaga, who's a policy and governance analyst, and last but not least, Arnold Maliba, policy and governance analyst. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming by today. Clearly 2 hours is not enough. We need to give you like 5 hours of the same. But thank you so much for coming by today, and thank you for staying with us until the end of the show. This is where we put a stop on AM Live, but do not go too far, because I'm coming back in the next few seconds with your world. So see you very shortly.